Just say hello to Colleen Murphy. Hello, Colleen.
Hello. How are you, Tim?
Good. Good. And MJ, of course.
Hey Tim,
Goodbye.
All right, MJ, how many people do we have in the weight room?
we we have two more I'm letting in right now, and that's it.
Okay. All right. Let me know when we're ready, MJ.
Yeah, there's everyone should be in here. That's
No, no.
I let them in.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the January 23rd AI Task Force meeting. And I just wanted to, I guess, set the stage for where we're going. Our I guess, legislative purview was to come up with the report by February 1st. The goal of today's meeting is it's been a lot of me talking in these previous meetings. And so, as my grandfather would admonish me, and it wasn't him, it was Seneca who said it originally. I have two ears, one mouth, so I need to listen more and talk less. So, the goal for today is I'll try to facilitate communication, but I would like to hear from all of the members of the task force, any legislators. Another thing I just want to put out is that the goal of this task force is to come up with a legislative framework. We're not going to be developing language here. The legislators, once we get a framework, the legislators will take that and make that into language. And just another update in general, I do believe that the EU has language now. And so their AI Act, from my understanding, I had an update last night. The AI Act will get voted on, and it has to go through a few different stages, but the first vote will be in February. There is consolidated language. So as we get to some of the points, I will read from that. I haven't read it all because it is a 268 page document that I downloaded last night, but that's much better than the 1,000 pages because it's been consolidated. The other thing I would just say to everyone to please, mute yourself until you are speaking. So with that, I'll just ask my co-chair Nick if he had any words that he wanted to say.
Senator, I think you did a great job of kicking us off. I think we'll all be civil and polite, so hands up, microphones off until you get called on, and we're all ears from here on in.
Thank you. And again, MJ had circulated. Thank you to everyone. You've sent in the recommendations. MJ consolidated them. And so we're just going to go through. I don't know. One of the things that I think is there are two common points. I mean, there are a number of common points, but two things that I think as we travel, Nick and I have talked to a lot of different people throughout the state. And through our different task force meetings and talking with task force members and other people, it seems to be two of the most common things that come up are having this task force or some iteration of this task force continue to become an advisory group. And then the other is the need for a point person within government, and someone perhaps at DECD who can serve as a chief AI contact or chief AI officer. We did create the chief innovation officer that Dan is serving as while he is the commissioner designate. But perhaps that position also would be the correct place. But I'd love to get opinions on that. And I don't know if anyone, again, this is more of a roundtable discussion. I could go ask people questions based on what had been submitted, or if anyone had wanted to speak, feel free to raise your hand to be acknowledged. And if you're having trouble finding the raise your hand feature, it is under the reactions on the Zoom. So you click reactions and then you'll be able to see to raise your hand. Okay. Not seeing anyone with their hands raised now. Okay, Steve and then Chris. Steve Hernandez.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Maroney. Having looked at not only experienced the many conversations that we've had on this task force, but also the very thoughtful recommendations that have come from those conversations, listening to what's happening around the country on the question of artificial intelligence, which is at its very core a utility. And as with any other great utility that we have encountered as human beings in the history of humanity, the question always arises: how are we going to share that utility? Will we have equitable access to that utility? How do we protect each other from the power of that utility? And how do we use it in order to further the aims of humanity? And those questions are questions that are not hidden, siloed, or kept in any one agency of government, in any one corner of government, or in any one part of our society. And that's why it seems, as I looked at some of those really thoughtful recommendations, one thing that occurred to me, and especially when I honed in on the recommendation by Mr. George Mathenall, the idea that we need a coordinated understanding, a coordinating crossing guard at the highest levels of policymaking, where decisions are made and budgets are decided, a crossing guard to determine how we as a state collaborate with our regional partners and our global partners to really ensure that this utility is safe and accessible. That is really the question that we have to confront, because otherwise what we will be doing is regulating what is a question of the future of humanity to one agency or another, and we will be doing it and us a disservice. So I just wanted to say that. I really admire the work that has gone into this consideration, and I look forward to the future of continuing to work in these spaces with you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think it was Chris, but you put your hand down, so I'm not sure if you want to be acknowledged.
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you,
Okay,
Senator.
Chris.
Yeah, I really again appreciate all of the information that was shared throughout the meetings here. TechNet submitted our recommendations. I think that the context here is kind of recognizing both that, in Connecticut, we're heading into a short session, and meanwhile, we have all of these federal work streams that were kind of detailed by Chloe in October. Our recommendations leaned more toward positioning Connecticut to invest in the workforce and educational front, leveraging what the state is already very strong in industry-wise to really position the state as a leader in this new frontier, and making sure that kind of the new jobs and the new opportunities are created are done so equitably and evenly across the state. So just drilling down on a small handful of what we put in there, the very basic, ensuring K through 12 access to foundational computer science curriculum all across the state is crucial. I really liked a point that Chief Workforce Officer Vyers identified on the December call. When we talk about workforce development funds coming from WIOA and the federal government, they are very limited and kind of flow in the same patterns that they have for the last 100 years. So to the extent that anything new is coming from the state as it comes to workforce development, we need to think differently than we do kind of with the traditional workforce development sectors, reaching underserved communities, the underemployed, folks who are kind of in between jobs, who are not necessarily unemployed and therefore not eligible for, some federal funds, but folks who just need a leg up to get into this industry. And that means partnering with industry and online platforms, getting industry recognized credentials, And I know it was not included in our written recommendations, but in the last or the second to last meeting we had, the discussion of the importance of having access to these high functioning computing centers, that infrastructure that is needed for researchers and startups. And again, I mentioned the Massachusetts life sciences model of the state investing in that kind of infrastructure so that our schools and our students and our researchers can have access to that as well. So those are just a couple of the things that were included in our recommendations.
Hey, Senator, if I could just comment on Chris's excellent set of points, and especially the last point, Chris, we took that comment seriously. We are working separately on that whole issue of high performance computing resources for the state. So you'd be amazed, maybe you won't be amazed, but a lot of people jumped on that.
Yeah,
So we have a lot of folks now very excited about our possibilities, Chris. So don't give up yet. Don't give up.
excellent.
Yeah, Chris, and thank you. I've been looking at the Mass Life Science Center model. And I was at the BioCT breakfast yesterday where they did have, where they talked about that. They had people from Massachusetts and New York talking about the investments that those states had made. The workforce, yeah, definitely agreed that's a priority. I think that there was a great report. I think that the case report was they did a great job of laying out and making recommendations, understood about equitable access. The digital divide in Connecticut is real, right? I mean, the survey, the digital equity report, it's 27% of families do not have access to high-speed internet. And it's not necessarily because they're not wired. They may not have a device or whatever reason. So we do have to work on that. Narrowing that gap. If we're going, a lot of the training and the new skills are going to require continuous learning, which can't be done from a phone, right? You're going to need to be connected to a device to iterate and to really to learn and get the most out of those classes. And so we need to make sure we're not furthering that divide. So those are things we need to look at. I think with workforce, looking at looking to the workforce for a couple models, right? So one of the things is, do we use, for the advisory committee, do we work off of their regional sector partnerships that have already been established? Again, I'm a big fan of not creating new infrastructure if we don't need to. How can we leverage our existing infrastructure? And then also looking to the Manufacturing Innovation Fund as a model. I do see Billy from OWS, who I think is responding to Chris's comments. If you're responding to Chris's comments, you can go. If not, I got to put you on the bottom of the line after the other people who I know we're going to bring up their own recommendations.
For sure, Senator. If I may skip the line for just a second here and just continue off Chris's thought. Really appreciate, having the Office of Workforce Strategy, be a part of this group. I'm Billy Wong, Senior Policy Advisor. And Senator, as we were just chatting last week about this with Kelly, there's a lot of efforts that are currently ongoing right now. We recently convened all the regional sector partnerships to really talk about what the next frontier looks like. And we had that at Central Connecticut State University about 2 weeks back. And really the consensus, and we had a lot of breakout sessions. We had a healthcare and biosciences breakout session. We had a manufacturing breakout session, and we had an IT breakout session. And then we covered a lot of alleged priorities and whatnot afterwards as well. But what was really a common theme across, all these industry sectors is that there's a need to engage with students at an earlier age and continually engage with them. And when you're talking about something like AI, it's not really just tech. It's technology applications across all these different sectors. And that is really, I think, the skill sets that need to be built over time. The way in which we engage with learning is going to fundamentally change with AI. And that is a bright new horizon, as you all presented with the case reports. A lot of K-12 educators are really at the exploration phase right now. And a lot of businesses, while they acknowledge that the use of technology is and AI is very, very important, they're not quite sure how to implement that. And they're not quite sure how to implement that, with the rigor that, for instance, Amazon has with their internal practices. So we really do need to work on both ends. We need to work on the K-12 end, really, starting from a very, very young age, probably middle school or earlier, as Nick mentioned, revamp the curriculum. And then we need to really bring employers to the table and provide practical work-based learning opportunities. So that's something that we really welcome at OWS, and that's something that we're thinking seriously about. So in so far as, being able to, work with all of you to be able to both convene the partners and also provide domain expertise, I think that's something that Kelly and the whole team at OWS welcomes. And we really would like to, think in a more granular way in terms of how we, work with industry leaders to design curriculum, and then how to implement that, and then how to bring employers to the table as well, and then be able to create these credentials of value. So, really, really huge thanks to everyone, to Senator Maroney, to Nick, to everyone on this task force for all the incredible work. And we look forward to working very closely with you moving forward.
Thanks, Billy. Yeah, I've enjoyed our conversations and definitely look forward to continuing to work together on some of those ideas that you brought that I think are really important. And I see, as we do try to compete, I think one of the focuses of the bill is going to be how do we grow businesses in our state? And we mentioned double down on what we're strong at, which I think is healthcare is really where we can lead. And then also, but building our workforce and making sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed. So with that, I'll go to Nick. Nick, not Nick D'Onofrio, Nick Smara. Sorry. I have to be careful.
I'm the other Nick.
The other Nick, yeah.
The other Nick, yep. Yeah, so thank you for kind of giving me the opportunity to kind of go through the comment and proposal that we put out. I'm Nick Smara with the Freedom of Information Commission. I just wanted to touch on some of the highlights of the memo that we distributed. So pretty much what we're proposing is that there's some any future AI legislation that Connecticut enacts has to have some type of statewide governing body or regulatory authority that would handle reporting requirements. And in the case of our proposal, we specifically honed in on model cards. Model cards, for those who aren't familiar with it, are essentially a short description or a short resource that can explain some essential concepts that are in these AI models, such as the model details, the intended uses, metrics, evaluation, training data, and ethical considerations. And really the reason why we focused in on model cards is because we feel like that's a succinct document that can be easily created by any entity that is using, or actually the model, in this case, the model card would be created by the entity that had developed the model, but it would have to be filed by the entity that would be incorporating that model into any high impact system. And we're focusing on high impact systems really because those are the ones that pose the most threat in terms of equity and how it impacts people's lives, such as law enforcement and access to public and private services and different employment decisions. And so I won't go through the entire memo we put up, but some of the highlights is really having a statewide database, a state maintained database that's publicly accessible, and that can be used as essentially this filing requirement that we have, that would be there, that entities that are employing these model cards would entities that are employing these AI models would submit these model cards to, and then those model cards would be accessible for the public to see. as I mentioned before, the obligation would be for the public or private entity utilizing the AI model to file model cards, so that essentially how envisioning it would work is that the developer of these AI models would be in contact with these organizations using these AI models and getting those model cards from them. And also developing minimum standards for these model cards that are for not only the information that is provided on that, but also the scientific rigor. And I think it would be important for whatever authority is created to have the authority to reject the model cards that don't meet minimum standards. The main takeaway from all of it is I think it, using and implementing these model cards would tie together a lot of the concerns that, were just raised by others, specifically with the intended uses. We can now, have some type of database that says for each model that's employed within the state that impacts people in a significant way, these are how they're meant to be used. These are, they shouldn't be used this way. And also how, what's the validity of these models? How accurately do they align with their intended usage? And also having that ready access as a public document can make it so that kind of demystify some of these AI models, and that having a relatively simple and straightforward means of information would be important, so that the everyday person who doesn't have a lot of experience with this can look at this information, get at least a high concept of what this model is supposed to be doing, and then seeing how they can best use that, and if they want, if it's at an organization level, does it align to the intended uses, and really kind of democratizes the decision-making process, and makes it easier for organizations to incorporate more voices into making those decisions, as well as the general public into making those decisions. So just a general overview of what we put in our comments, but yeah, we open to any suggestions.
Yeah, thank you. And I am interested, right, in the model cards. I think I've been on so many different task forces now, I can't remember what was presented here or the other one, but Avi Fell and Eric Aldana, I believe they presented to us at this task force, but of Credo.ai have talked about different artifacts that can be used. So model cards, data cards, others, impact assessments. I guess, Nick, I just want to ask a question though, because recognizing the constraints of government, and that we have a spending cap in Connecticut, and there's really no money left under this spending cap. So the ability to create a new agency or a database, it's not as likely, right? So is requiring through the privacy policy or some other disclosure of model cards or again, another artifact, would that achieve, and I think the goal, and I think most people agree on a goal, it's just how are we going to get there, of accountability and transparency, right? So
Yeah,
accountability in my mind is the impact assessments. Transparency would be disclosing when you're interacting with an AI, and then also what's gone in, maybe not revealing trade secrets, but training data or summaries of training data and other important issues. So
yeah, just to respond to that real quick, I think there's some, it's all of this is a work in process, and can be tweaked to kind of fit the practical realities of the situation. I think, just kind of off the top of my head, just to give a little bit of background, before I joined the commission, I practiced in New York as an education attorney, and one of the laws we were dealing with is the student data privacy law. And there's a lot of comparisons to the requirements for that was in that, as well as kind of something that can be with these model cards, because each essentially the requirement there was any third-party contractor that was going to have access to student information needed to create these, needed to enter into a data privacy agreement, and on the back have like a supplemental information that was a high level overview of what was incorporated in the data privacy agreement. So in that sense, it's kind of similar. And the filing requirement there was that the in that case, the school district needed to have it in posted on their website. So I guess the reason why I am advocating for a more centralized approach is that you get some uniformity in terms of standards. When I saw with the data privacy agreements was really kind of each, unless they were our client, if they weren't our client, then the data privacy agreements look all very different. But having some type of standard, and that's why, advocating for a centralized approach. Another way it could be implemented, though, is having a kind of still having the filing requirement, but making it on making the onus on whatever organization or public agency or public entity is incorporating that AI model. That leads to less. And that also makes things a little harder to find for the general public, but it gets you that benefit of not having to create a separate public agency to oversee it. The important thing, regardless of how, if it's centralized or decentralized, is that these files need to be or model cards need to be available to the public and available through a official means, I guess is the best way to say it, rather than relying on entities to on their own accord to go through the process and develop it and make sure it's available to really have that official something codified that's going to say these model cards are going to be available, and whether it's on the entity's website or something filed through the state more formally. I think that's the main concern, because this information in these model cards are really helpful and really important, and for everyday individuals, I think goes a long way.
Okay, great, thank you. Now I saw some hands come up. Vahid, I know you're next to present, and I actually have. Well, I shouldn't say actually, because you would expect me to have questions, but I have some specific questions for you. But Dave DeRoche, did you have a question for Nick, or did you want to just present your? I can't hear you.
Dave, we can't hear you.
Okay, good. I'm not the only one.
Can you hear me now?
There
Yeah.
you go.
Yep.
Perfect, Dave.
All
Thank
right.
you.
It's been a tech nightmare in my class this morning. It was a whole thing. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to sort of support everything Nick was saying. No matter what method we choose to support transparency, that is a primary driver in the stuff that we're doing, in making sure that that the transparency is meaningful. Excuse me, whether it's in in model cards like Nick is talking about, or in counterfactual explanations, which I talked about in my note, which is simply, you input data that would be opposite of, so if a system made a decision, in my case, I would be able to ask the system to create a solution based on a different set of parameters. And if that output matched my output, not necessarily in exact output, but if the system came back with not considerably different outputs, then you would know, or you at least have a better idea of whether or not that process had any kind of bias in it. So yeah, and I would just say a few quick points, because I know we all have a lot to say about this, and we all care a lot about this. One thing.
Are your points in response to what Nick had to say? Are these the points that you would say?
Yes. Yeah. So in response to Nick, but also just generally about, the importance for transparency, having, the concern about IP around, some of the technology that we're using, it's going to be challenging from a lot of different fronts, notably if, any of these systems are using machine learning and they're changing, thousands of times a day. How meaningful is, the actual algorithm, or how meaningful are model cards if the model cards themselves have to be altered on a regular basis. I mean, I think we just need to think, hard about transparency being meaningful for people, right? And I think, that's what we care about. I think from the open government perspective. And just real quickly on the other points, and just in response, and I'll just talking about the framework that MJ set out real quickly. I think one of the things we might want to think about including, and no, it's not a legally, or maybe it is a legally protected class, but just, beliefs. We talk a lot about class, race, religion, sexuality, gender, but belief is not mentioned in there. And I do think that that might go a long way toward reestablishing, trust among a large portion of the population that doesn't trust anything that the government does. So maybe, having that, I know we're not talking about language. I know this is just a framework, but I just think, as we talk about it, it might be good to keep that in mind. And one thing I will be a little bit of a Debbie Downer about. I know we're all very optimistic about workforce development and these things, and I am as well. And I'm on board with everything we're talking about. I think healthcare sector is a path forward for the state. Educational programs, getting children exposed to this early and in an appropriate way. I do worry that in journalism there are competing values of accuracy and primacy. And when primacy wins, accuracy sometimes, falls into the wayside. So, obviously, I think, the idea that Connecticut should lead the way in this, I think is fair, but I'm not sure that should trump or triumph over the need to do it correctly. So I think those two values, as we talk about these things, should be considered equally. I think we want to do it right. And in most cases, right is more important than first, but some cases, doing them at the same time, at least. I think doing it first, just for the sake of being first, I think it might be a fool's errand. But also, when the one final point I'll make is, within the document itself, there is this idea of how data is shared internally and externally. And there is kind of a theme that, knowledge sharing is good, which, it's hard to debate. But I wonder, in some of the work that I did when I was asking the city of Pittsburgh about how they deployed their, or how they shared their data that they use in their AI or in their predictive algorithms, they couldn't tell me whether or not they had shared or would share data with the FBI, for example. So I think we need to think really specifically about how and when we share internal data that is used by AI systems, because, when different AI systems used by different state agencies are sharing data, it sounds good, but we don't know if that bias then might be exacerbated by these two AI systems sharing data in this way. So I think we just need to be really, really cautious about how public data is shared among state agencies or between state agencies and federal agencies, and also being very, very specific about if ever the state shares public data with third parties, if that is ever appropriate, what that process looks like, and that there should be, pretty strict guidelines around that.
Okay, thank you. So, Colleen, did you have a comment
Yeah.
for Nick or?
Oh, yeah. Well, just briefly, I just want to thank Nick from our office for drafting that memo for you. And just, Senator, to your point about cost, certainly we would recognize that there's a cost component to the model cards and centralized database. But I think, generally our idea, which we, of course, wave the flag of transparency and just trying to instill public trust and confidence, particularly in government, but of course the policy and thought process applies in the private sector as well. But we think, if you could build upon your Public Act 2316, which already requires an inventory of sorts, that I know DAS has to do that right now, but I think if we could incrementally build on that, that's probably the most practical approach. And then the last thing I would say, in the government sector, if we come up with this idea of model cards or some other way to provide the transparency, I think we'd want to ensure that that's the floor to transparency, not the ceiling. That we wouldn't want to say the public is simply entitled to these model cards or whatever is in that database. The rest would still be subject to the FOI Act and, of course, provide protections for confidential proprietary information and all of that. But we wouldn't want to say, okay, that's the end of the day. We've provided transparency, because there will be, many more components to it other than what's in those model cards or other choice item through which we provide that access. That's it.
Okay, thank you. All right, Vahid?
Thank you, Senator. I have a large number of points. I'm going to try to summarize them into a list of 3. As per the text of my recommendations, I want to emphasize on the need for standard safety, reliability, and ethics benchmarks. And I'm essentially asking for a government entity here in Connecticut who's responsible for developing, maintaining, and providing, ideally for free, a set of data sets, a set of testing frameworks, and maybe on a more technical level, accessible online services. The technical jargon is API endpoints that enable AI developers to benchmark their tools against the baselines and the tools that are verified by the government. This enables the developers to, first of all, be on the same page with the government, be aware of what the technical requirements are, and can quantitatively and readily establish the compliance of their AI tools with what the regulatory requirements are. The second point that I wanted to bring up was about watermarking. I think it's worth mentioning again that enforcing or requiring some form of watermark to be put on the output of AI models, particularly generative AI models, is, well, technically infeasible. And it's not just a figure of speech, it's not a political stance, it's a theoretical result that is supported by experiments. I've already shared a number of references in my recommendation about how, for instance, large language models cannot be reliably watermarked. And it's also antithetical to the entire AI endeavor. Watermarking in any sense, and of course, I'm not talking about just putting a sticker on an image. I'm talking about providing means for forensically establishing the origins of generative AI products, the products of the model, is never going to be at the technical level of reliability and certainty that courts of law would accept as evidence, for instance. But on the third note, and I'm willing to answer any questions that anyone might have about these 2 points. The third point that I wanted to bring up is about the need for something similar to BioCT for AI here in Connecticut. There's a mention of an advisory board in the draft of the report that this committee has mentioned. I actually think that what we need is bigger than just a government advisory board. We need a nexus, we need a connectum, we need a platform that enables the connection, facilitates the connection of AI developers, AI researchers, educators, the government, and all other interested parties. And I believe that the initial move for the establishment of such an organization can greatly benefit from legislative support. I believe that's the end of my 3-point list. Thank you.
So, all right, let me take it. First, can you explain one of the points you didn't talk about, but that I found interesting that you'd sent in, forensic ability versus explainability? And can you explain what you mean by that? And is there a way that that could be put in legislation?
So, as I mentioned in my recommendation, and I believe I've seen at least a few other mentions of the same point in other recommendations, explainability and interpretability are underdefined notions in AI. There are no solid metrics of how good an explanation is, what an acceptable explanation is, and these notions can change over time, as we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years. These are not solid, endurable, sustainable requirements to enforce over AI. On the other hand, forensicability refers to the ability of a forensic investigator to be able to identify the root cause of a fault or a particular behavior. And I believe that forensic ability can encompass certain aspects of explainability and interpretability, but it goes beyond it. In the NIST framework and a few other frameworks, model governance includes ideas like chain of custody, ideas like reversibility or traceability. And I believe that the traceability idea, documentation, and standards for model governance are certainly concepts that can be made into language for legislation.
Thank you. So now I have questions. A lot of what you had shared on the watermarking, a lot of it was related to text, right? And I agree that it's that fool's errand, right, on the watermarking on the text. The draft of the EUAI Act, they are going to require, I think, watermarking for images. And I do see like one of the, and I know it's not a silver bullet, right? But as one of the big concerns is that content authenticity, the fear of deep fakes. Are there, I mean, I do see some utility in an ability there, or are there other means of content authenticity? Because, we talk about trust in AI, and we need to, we need to be able to trust what we see, right? And we know just this weekend, right? And actually, not just what we see, what we hear, right? The phone call that was sent out in New Hampshire that was supposedly from President Biden telling people to stay home. We know of the images that were spread in New Jersey of those poor high school girls. They took their yearbook photos and used the notification software to send out naked pictures of those girls. And, we know that, I guess of deep fakes, 98% of deep fakes are non-consensual intimate images, right? And so, that ability to cause harm, to undermine our faith in what we're seeing and what we're hearing. So I feel we need to do something, right? And I think, looking at other states, there's model legislation in terms of deep fakes for campaigns. Public Citizen has been one group they've presented. I've seen them present and met with them. And in that bill, it's more just putting the onus. If you knowingly spread false, a deep fake, right, maliciously, then there's a penalty. And the state of New York on the revenge porn has done the similar thing, but it doesn't have to just, again, be the revenge porn. Any non-consensual intimate images, we need to look at some penalty for spreading those. But I guess if you're saying we shouldn't do watermarking on the images and the videos, what are the ways we can establish trust? And what are the...
That's a very good question. I'm going to try to answer it in a technical manner because, as you know, I'm not a legal expert. If a piece of revenge porn or synthetic image was created by a human being using Photoshop, wouldn't it be as bad as a deep fake? It would probably need to be treated the same way. We don't ask photo editing experts or video editing experts to watermark their products, but we do impose limits or legal restrictions on what can be done with the tools that are available to them. In terms of political campaigns, I believe that there are already a few pieces of legislation at the state, maybe at the federal level, that address this
Five
particular
states have
aspect.
passed legislation.
Yeah.
And
That if AI-generated content is being used in political messaging, it needs to be clearly stated somewhere, or it can't be used. And I believe this form of ad hoc, as well as generic non-AI specific regulation, is going to be more enduring, more sustainable than passing or enforcing a blanket rule for watermarking. Um, and again, I'm not a legal expert, but I assume that there are already laws about revenge porn or dissemination of indecent images without the consent of the parties and so on. Maybe the volume and the ease of access to deepfake technology has brought back the same discussion, but it's still the same issue. It's the issue that we've been dealing with for decades: synthetic media, doctored media for fake messaging. And I, again, don't believe that watermarking or enforcing blanket watermarking is a solution to this. Ad hoc, case by case, as well as generic non-AI specific solutions are probably the way to go here. And the reason I advocate for these is, Dr. Senator Maroney, the generative AI technology is essentially an optimization problem. And if an adversary wants to go around any detection mechanism, they just use that detection mechanism as a critic, as part of that optimization problem, to train a model that overcomes it. That's why many of the deepfake detection tells, like the shape of the ears in images that are often mangled in earlier deepfakes and so on, have gone away, because newer models are being trained to overcome those identifiable tells. Whatever technical tool that we develop for the detection of deepfake can be used to enhance the generation of deepfakes. And I don't think enforcing a blanket rule is going to solve this issue. Essentially, it's not going to be enforceable technically.
yeah, and I think I agree that it's not going to solve the issue, but I do see utility, right? That it could be part of the contribution. And I think that this is such part of the solution, and maybe only a small part, but I think it's such a big problem that again, with the AI, there's the ability to distribute at mass scale, right? And that's versus the Photoshop and other, and Photoshop and Adobe does have a content authenticity, and you can take any images right to their website and you can see when they were modified and to go through that provenance. So maybe it's just we need to require some other form of provenance. But the other thing I'll say, Amazon now in their generative AI has started putting in some form of watermarking that you would have to use their API to find that. So, but I know for text, I know, and I know there are ways around it, but there are ways around almost every law we pass. So I don't know if that's necessarily like if the goal is then putting in a penalty, and the key has to be the malicious intent, right? When you're using something that's fake or malicious intent versus, which is always the hardest thing as a law to prove anyways, is intent. So
Senator Maroney, on that note, when you talk about watermarking, you're essentially referring to the detectability, the identifiability of synthetically generated media. If the point is to disincentivize malicious content, maliciously generated synthetic media, given what I just told you, that at the end of the day, there will be ways of going around detectability, wouldn't that particular term, malicious intent, be enough for the law that you want to enforce? Does the detectability part matter?
Yeah, I think that to generating the trust in what we're seeing, I think there needs to be some way of doing that. So I do think, and you know, to your point with the detection, right, that's going to come in waves, right? Like as soon as we get better at detecting fake content, and earlier on, Google presented to us that with the, you know, they were 98% accurate at detecting the synthetic audio, which means you can detect the synthetic video if you can detect the synthetic audio. But to your point, now the generative AIs will get better, right? If you wanted to, and it's going to be a constant wave between the detection and changing. But I guess my thing is I understand that, but I don't know if that means we don't have to try. That's what I struggle with, and I see Nick has his hand, Dave, and Professor B. So all people who are much more knowledgeable than I am. So I will go. I think Dave had his hand up first, and then Nick. Dave Ferrucci. I'm sorry. There's probably several
Sure.
Daves in this call.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. Yes, I just wanted to chime in here. I mean, first of all, I think that's right. I mean, I think you do have to try. I think though what you don't want to happen is that attempt to try to detect these things with war, playing basically the war games of detection and then overcoming detection and so forth. To take away from the realization we all have to have that this AI enables this at an amplified rate, and you just have to acknowledge that and say, how do we shape our laws to prepare for that reality? So in other words, on one hand, sure, you want to try to do that. Maybe you want to play the detect and overcome wars, and that, and in some sense, that brings due attention to the fact that this is possible with AI. But then you want to sit there and say, if this is going to happen, how do we also adjust our laws to protect people from this happening? And so, as you said, as part of it, it's not the whole solution. The other thing I wanted to, as we were talking about, it was a great conversation, and I just had this off the hip kind of idea that I just wanted to share, which is, maybe it's crazy, but it's kind of more of the, when you have the whitelist approach, which is I can imagine anyway, people registering their likelihood and saying, don't you dare generate anything with my face in it. And that APIs are required then to say, we're not generating that. And if you generate that, you're breaking that trust. Because now you're relying on the AI to do what it does well, which is to find that similarity. I mean, there might be some false positives, but you're essentially creating this contract between the public that comes out and says, here's my image, don't make this. If you see my image, it's got to come from me, so it's kind of the whitelist approach. So anyway, it's an interesting thought I just wanted to throw out there.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that is, it's, one of the things that's been talked about, right, is how do you create a chain of custody and authenticity, right? So, and then to your point, right, how do you do prohibited training, I guess, on someone's image? And I think you had also mentioned that in your suggestions for protecting the intellectual property was almost like a do not crawl for search engine.
Yeah, I think that's you're right. I think that's actually a similar notion, analogous notion, which is there's just a reality that these things are generative AI or generating variants of data that people are putting in. I know the New York Times is suing OpenAI. Who knows where that's going? We talked about like the cat already being back. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube or whatever it is. But there has to be some acknowledgement that the lack of accountability and attribution to the results of generative AI is an issue for us. It's a real issue. And we are seeing that in the entertainment industry already, right? I mean, people are, copying the likelihood of all kinds of, who knows, right? There's so many different dimensions of my unique art where ultimately it might not be traceable back to me, especially if you do it in the aggregate. So you're getting this huge advantage of disenfranchising people because it's such an aggregate collection of things, and you can't really trace it back to its provenance. I don't know how we think about that. I just think that's a really tough question. Just thinking about what the implications are. I'll say one other thing though, because I have the floor. I'll put a note in the chat. And I love the idea of a model card that was discussed earlier. And I just dumped a bunch of text there. I'll jump a little bit more. But one of the things with regard to transparency, especially generative AI, is like, how good are you at knowing that your answer is right or wrong? And this we call this confidence estimation. Can you estimate an accurate confidence? This is actually very hard to do, especially for the way generative AI and the way it works, because it's really not to be trained to be correct. It's trained to generate statistically likely, phrases given the training data. How do you know you're really right? There's no grounding for right, wrong, or properly reasoned or reasoned according to whatever. So it's a challenge, but regardless of how much of a challenge it is, and I think how hard it is to do, I think we've got to recognize that this is something that we want. And, even if a system is, say, 70% right in aggregate, when I, as a user, go and use it and it gives me an answer, what I'm looking for is, how confident are you that you just gave me the right answer? And if you say, hey, I'm sure this is right, and that guess is random, I'm compromised. I don't know what to do now. I know the cat's out of the bag, and this is very hard for this current crop of AI to achieve. But I think as we set ambitious standards and expectations, while it may be difficult for AI systems to meet that expectation, it's something we should at least be aware of that we want, and what the implications are of not having that. And it's an important metric. It was actually one of the hardest when we did Watson at IBM. It was one of the hardest things to do. I could always generate an answer, but there's a cost of being wrong. So how do I collect the evidence and accurately predict? Because if I think I'm going to get it wrong, I don't even want to try. So this is really, really an important thing to understand. And when people who use AI, I say this all the time. How do you know that's right or wrong? Well, the GPT says it's really confident, but I can show you that it's confident. Its confidence is not based in anything. And in fact, what's really fast, I'm going to tell you this. This is an anecdote. It's a true anecdote, but it's hysterical. If I keep asking the generative AI, like, are you confident or not? If I tell it that a human generated the answer, it's more likely to say it's wrong. Now, maybe it's right about that, but it's just funny.
So, if you don't mind, in your recommendations, I mean, you have a lot of important points. I think one of them is that we don't want to hamper innovation, right? And the ability for AI and I mean, to promote good and to drive positive outcomes. We see so many health outcomes, so many things. One of the things I haven't read much of the EU's AI Act, but one of the things they say is regulation should support innovation, respect freedom of science, and should not undermine research and development activity. It is therefore necessary to exclude from its scope AI systems and models specifically developed and put into service for the sole purpose of scientific research and development. So I think whatever we cover, we'll try to narrowly tailor what we're trying to regulate, but I don't know if you think it would be, if we should also be very clear that we're exempting AI from research, or if that creates too big of a loophole where sometimes, with legislation, you're afraid of creating too big of a loophole.
Yeah, so I don't know the right, I mean, I think again that's a tough question to implement. My feeling, I just want to be really clear on why I think why it's so important. It's because that to be able to do the R&D and to pursue the technology, because I think it's our only hope. In some sense, it's understanding human intelligence, human cognition, and how it relates to artificial intelligence and machine intelligence, and how they come together. That's actually going to protect us against AI itself. So you can't just stop working on it. You can't stop working on AI. It's coming. There's and you know, your best people and those with the especially with those with the public interest in mind have to understand where this technology is and how it's going to develop and what's its strengths and what its weaknesses are. So it would be very dangerous to kind of shut that down. At the same time, how do you govern its application? And I think where my mind goes is focusing on the application. In other words, where is it being used? How is it being used? How do we measure its effectiveness and its transparency? And focus on that part. Your regulation focuses on that part of the equation. And I think we have a lot of the right ideas here around effectively measuring its accuracy, its accurate confidence estimation, its transparency, its provenance, and so forth and so on, as we go and apply to problems. But the R&D, going and saying you shouldn't do R&D in AI or so somehow limited, you just don't know where the boundaries are around these things. One invention in one area can lead to an invention in another area that opens up a whole new thing. And it's just very hard to go in and say, like, it's so presumptuous to say you're going to manage and bound the R&D when it means you understand where it's going, but that's why it's R&D, right? So it's
and right, that's, I mean, how do we not hamper innovation? It's the unknown unknowns, right? We have we have some known knowns that are risks, some known unknowns we think could be risks, but there's also known benefits and potential benefits. So I guess the way I think about it is, looking at what gets measured improves. So I think looking at how do we use artifacts like model cards and impact assessments to make sure we're testing for harms to avoid them, right? To try to drive the behaviors we want to see. And again, not saying not to do anything, but that as soon as you identify a harm, try to fix that, and make
if you have an AI making a healthcare decision, if you are even have an AI making a personal financial decision or something like that, it's very different than doing horoscopes, right? I mean, so understanding the impact and how it's being absorbed by the public, and what are the thresholds for those things? Like, I think that's where you focus. Understanding that it's important to understand the technology and how it works. I think that goes back to the education part and how we use it. But you probably can set a bunch of external metrics on the interface, if you will. I don't mean on the UI. I mean the interface between the technology and how you use it. Whatever, accuracy, confidence, explainability, and all these things. Not necessarily easy to measure, but possible to measure.
Okay. Thank you. I know Professor Bai from UConn.
Just Jimbo. That's fine.
Jimbo, okay. Jimbo,
yeah. I'm very glad to be here, to be included in the discussions. I hear a lot, and I've been thinking a lot. It makes me think. So I wonder if we really need to set up like some kind of one-size-fits-all solution at this moment, because like what has been discussed so far, there's so many different dimensions for for us to consider, and there's just a great diversity of AI applications, predictive AI, generative AI, and now people talking about the foundation models. And there's lack of benchmarking for the different systems. So I don't know if we set up something, because we're not super clear with the different definitions, the different situations we may encounter later on. We set up some standards, set up some laws. Later on, it becomes, I don't know, barrier or some issue for us. So, I mean, I have this idea I put into my recommendations. I don't know that's a good or bad idea. I'm just saying maybe we can set up something similar to clinical trials. If a company puts up a product, and there are really many, many different kinds of products they can create based on AI, different kinds, right? And maybe for one type, we should do something really, maybe, I don't know, watermarking, or for another type, we will more likely need, some data sets to know the generative AI ChatGPT really gives the correct answer or meaningful answer for some kind of a question answering tasks, right? So I put something in there like a usability trial, or similar to clinical trial. So the company needs to work with the government, needs to work with the users, set up something that's agreeable, similar to clinical trial. So the company needs to pay money to actually go through that process. And it gave us some buffer zone, I don't know, 3 months, a half a year, it depends on the product, that gave us some buffer zone to really check the safety of that system, the reliability of that system before it go live. So I don't know, that's something reasonable or meaningful for putting into this regulation paper. So another thing is the explainability, the interpretability issue, and everybody is talking about we need some interpretability for the AI system. It's a black box, and it makes people really, we need a human cognitive trust for the AI system, and interpretability, explainability will improve the transparency of the system. But according to the current research, I mean, the science right now, I don't really think there is satisfactory explanation methods that are available that we can actually use to interpret the generative AI model behind the ChatGPT. So early on, we discussed, I guess we discussed different levels of explainability. One level could be really, we want to know the reasoning, the full reasoning behind ChatGPT, the generative AI. Or we talk about the detecting malignancy, that's already enough, for saying this product should not be on market. So I guess we need some understanding of what kind of level of explainability, interpretability we're looking for, to what level will be enough for now, so we can write into that bill. That's not super clear to me. And also, Senator Murney, you mentioned there's no really funding really available to set up a entity or a department with the state that actually can perform, impact assessment, or actually perform the regulation steps for the different products. So I don't know if we put something in there, what that means the state needs to do something for that, needs to put in some funding for creating such an agency, or maybe make it a part of the current agency. I don't know. I mean, I guess based on, I look at some of the recommendations from other experts, I feel one of the things that's really in common is people are saying we need some kind of a committee, some kind of group that continues the discussion to have, hopefully we can timely revise whatever policy we set up later on, if it becomes something that's not appropriate, we have a mechanism to correct or mechanism to make the more appropriate to the current situation, to the new development in the technology world. And another term for the education. I went to last semester. I went to a annual meeting for computer science teacher association annual meeting. That's computer science, but AI largely overlaps with computer science. And teachers, K-12 teachers, they are saying they really lack of funding to actually implement some of the materials that are quite a lot of the materials are related to AI education or using AI tools to help their classroom education. So, I mean, I guess we need some kind of resource to really make it happen. So I may stop here.
No, thank you. I share the concerns as well around the explainability, interpretability. I think it is so hard to explain. I think how it comes at some of the decisions, right? And you're right, to what level? To some people may
Right.
not be able to understand how you explain it. I do like the analogy of the clinical trials, and I think that there are some, like, we have to be careful, like, well, when it comes to speech, like with prior restraint, but with the trials, looking at the level of risk, right? Sometimes trials have to be approved, and sometimes if it's a lower risk, product that's being manufactured, the companies, we rely on them to self-certify that they've tested. And so I do think that that is the model and that flexibility, right? And what I think we need to look at this are, what are things we can agree on now, right? That we know are important. And I think what will happen is, and you've seen it with other things, if people will argue, you can't regulate us, it's too early, we need to innovate. And then you come back in a few years, they say, well, you can't change the rules on us, of the road on us now, because we've been doing it this way. So I think it is important that there are commonalities with data privacy and with other areas that we're regulating, that we lean on some of those, like the impact assessments, like the model cards, to lay out some broad rules of the road. And then, as you say, get a group together to continue to come back and look at this, right? Because we know it's going to continually evolve. We're already on, ChatGPT launched publicly November 30th, 2022 with 3.0, and it went to 3.5, 3.5 turbo, 4.0. I'm not sure if we're at 4.0 turbo yet, but in just a year, right, we've seen all the different models and other products. So we know things will change, and that we're not a one and done on this legislation. This is an every year issue, and we don't want to, I acknowledge we don't want to do anything to unnecessarily constrain it, but we do need to look at, as you said, like those trials and the safety, that we're making sure things are safe. Thank you so much for your time. And another point on the resources for educators, I think one of the things that came out to me in the case report, which again, I just want to reiterate how impressed I was with that report, how appreciative I am of that report, and how useful I feel that will be. But one of the things that, and you hear this a lot from teachers, is how overwhelming it's been since the pandemic and how much they've had to deal with, and just recognizing that it probably doesn't make sense for us to mandate anything. And that's beyond our purview, because we're not the education committee. But what resources can we provide? And that's something I've been looking at. Last year, House Bill 5001, which was the House priority bill, and with dealing with individuals with intellectual disabilities. But something that they had done in that bill was to require SDE to come up with training, professional development, and then to work with the RESCs to provide professional development for the teachers. So maybe that's a way we can go about, is just to, to look at potentially having the State Department of Education work with the educational service centers, regional educational service centers, to develop professional development around AI and use of AI across the curriculum, which is something SUNY Albany is launching AI across the curriculum because it's going to be useful, right? We're not necessarily training people to build the new models, but how to implement and use them. So that's something to look at, as well as maybe SDE can help, because it didn't seem like the districts yet had policies and procedures with, again, so providing that resource for local districts, maybe we can ask SDE to help develop policies and procedures for the models for the districts to use. Not mandating, but just a model to look at.
Right. I also heard from some of the local high school teachers, it seems the number of available teachers who are capable of teaching AI is also something that needs to be increased. So there may be some education program for the teachers, so they're capable of teaching AI to K-12 students.
Yeah, and that's important, right, is to train the teachers and provide them with the tools and the skills. I worked on a computer coding legislation in the past, and an interesting fact, code.org, when they looked at who made the best computer science teachers, it wasn't that they majored in computer science as an undergrad or anything. It was who raised their hands, who volunteered and said, I want to learn this and teach this. And because we're not training them to be computer scientists, we're training them to be computer science teachers, to inspire the kids and get them a base knowledge so they can move on and get more domain expertise. So thank you so much. And speaking of domain expertise, thank you for sharing your expertise with us and being part of this, being part of the task force, and for your thoughtful recommendations.
I'm actually glad to be part of this.
Thank you. And your diligent attention to all of the, the meetings. So thank you. And Nick, I think.
No, I'm going to go last. We want to hear from Claudio and from George, if that's okay with you, Senators, before we run out of time. Yeah.
We'll hear from Claudio and then George, and then you and I, in whichever order you want on that. So, okay, Claudio.
Hello. First of all, thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Senator Maroni, for all and the rest of the group for all the work that has been done. Mine is a comment on something that I've heard not only in this meeting, but in previous meetings, and the one of becoming a leader. My question is, becoming a leader exactly in AI in what? Because it's impossible to become a leader in many facets, in all the facets of AI. So one will have to decide exactly on what is going to excel. France, after the World War II, tried to be a leader with the goal in everything, and they couldn't do it. So one has to decide 2, 3, 4 areas in which to become a leader. And when I was in Deloitte, everybody was a leader of something. So they said, if you sufficiently reduce the domain, you're always going to be a leader. So one has to decide 2, 3, 4 areas in which to concentrate and develop that. And if one does that, one would have to, as Dave Ferrucci said, numerically, one has to quantify how to do it. So one can say to the rest of the world, yes, we are number 1, or we are number 2, or we are growing in that area because of this. So there have to be numbers that justify that. Number of PhD students, or number of candidates for something, or number of people that access the high power computing facilities, whatever, but it has to be numbers. And one area that would be particularly interesting and possible for Connecticut, being the insurance capital of the world, is insurance, again, supporting somehow the insurance companies that develop insurance against AI malfunctions. And that has not been discussed basically anywhere. But this will be, or Hartford will be the center. If Hartford could be the center of the AI insurance of the world, that would be profitable, very interesting, innovative, and really we could become the leader in that area. So that's one of the areas in which one can focus, and one can, after the case report and other things, one can also define probably another 2-3 areas. But I would be interested eventually in knowing which those areas are and concentrated on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Claudio. And Chris Gilrine spoke earlier, and when I was at the TechNet conference, that was one of the things that resonated. We're not just going to, I've had some people tell me, like, with my business, with my startup, I'm thinking of doing the AI thing. Well, if you're just thinking of doing it, what do you mean? You need to double down on what you're strong at. And I think with the insurance companies, with the hospital systems, with the research universities, I think AI for health is an area we can definitely be one of the leaders. I think as a region from New York to Boston, we can be the leader together in that area.
CBS News, I'm reading now, CBS News on December 18, it says, lawsuits take aim at the use of AI tool by health insurance. So we have a group working on health insurance, Hartford, the insurance capital of the world, interested in becoming a leader of AI. Everything can be put together to aim into things like that.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome.
And George.
So just taking back on what Claudio and some others have shared. So the health industry is not something that is easy to be a leader in this day and age, because lots of the healthcare industry is outsourced, and we do not have moats around Connecticut. And so it's outsourced to Arizona, Alaska, Spain, or France, or whatever. Even transcription by our local doctors is outsourced to California. So even though you're seeing a doctor in New Haven. So with AI, that becomes a difficult issue to mediate or control or adjudicate on how to regulate AI for healthcare. But I just want to, without going in any random order, rather, so to speak, this is the first time in the history of mankind we've dealt with technology where there was always a human being at the other end, or at least in one end. We have now come forward in 2024 where eventually there is only going to be one person at the end, and very soon, within the next year or two, there won't be any human being on either side of the AI that we're going to be dealing with. It is, as what someone said earlier, it's a black box that nobody has been able to identify what's in there. So we are going to have a new kind of a situation. And I'm reminded what Ford, he was pushing innovation to build his cars. The regulations came later after the innovation, because you can't regulate something you just don't know what to regulate upon. So that was a big model that I'm looking at now. Now, going back to new model cards that Nick brought up, which is now called nutrition labels. So there has been no standards, neither here in the United States or the Americas, what consists of those nutrition labels, for what purpose it is. So the nutrition labels have not been standardized or defined for the industry or for the product. So when we look at nutrition label, it's for foods. So it is for that industry or for that supplementary work. We know what's in those nutrition labels. So model card, the federal government, NIST, is trying to get a handle around that to identify how to go about establishing model cards, because there needs to be a standard. It cannot be something that every state, every country, all 172 countries around the world will have something different. So this is something that I needed all of you to understand and appreciate. From Colleen, we were talking about inventory as well as from Nick. So we got to differentiate between what the state government is having as an inventory, which is absolutely possible, but we cannot dictate that for the industries, the public sector. We can't do that for the educational sector, because there is no, the state government cannot mandate a multinational, cannot mandate on a Pfizer or a Jackson Labs or anybody saying this must be what you must do that. And then to create an inventory becomes a huge task, because I was looking at this back in 2019. We are going to be dealt with a voluntary based database repository, if you will. If somebody decides not to report, then that database is stale or useless or out of date, most likely after the first 6 months, because as what Vahid has said, these things changes with machine learning and all. That model is out of sync for us to control. So inventory was something else that NIST is looking at, how to create a repository of trusted AI or trustworthy AI. How to credential such an application from the application developer end. The state of Connecticut cannot be the arbitrary certifier of a particular tool, because that's not going to be recognized by the rest of the country or the other 49 states or rest of the world. So we are not an island. So that is something that I need all of you to be aware. It's not something we can build on a silo. And plus, we don't have the money. And I'm remembering when we had the NIST privacy and risk framework long ago, back in 2015 or 2013. Till today, there are only about, if I'm not wrong, 29 states in the United States that has adopted privacy and risk standard. All the others have not. Connecticut is one that has. But ours that are not harmonized with the other 28. So our privacy and risk laws are not standard from within the United States. So how are we going to accept that for the other part of things? So that's something that I wondered. So even if 5 states did pass a legislation on AI, quote unquote, what does that mean? End of the day, it truly doesn't have traction in the private public marketplace. So that is something we need to be adhering on. In terms of user groups, Yale has 4 or 5 user groups on AI. I know a gentleman up in Stonington who's also got an AI starting group. So they are all looking to create an AI starting group. And to Claudio's point, you can't be an AI networking group for everything, because the whole world is changing. So it has to be a particular niche of a networking group or something like that, or like an industry body and multiple sectors underneath. And the other troubling thing, AI now is in everybody's pocket. Microsoft Copilot is now on everybody's phone, every phone and every desktop. And yesterday, Google dropped access to large language models for all Android devices. So the question is, we don't even know what's in our own desktop, the different softwares, the different applications. We don't remember, keep record of it. How is the state of Connecticut going to do that for the public sector? We can do that for the federal state, but how are we going to do that for the private sector? That's almost impossible. So this is just a seed I wanted to plant with you, Senator. Since NIST is creating the frameworks, as in my recommendation, they got 30 items that they're looking to standardize. And as I understand from Monday or last Friday, there's another 5 or 6 more that they're items that they're looking to standardize. Perhaps our state legislators may consider awaiting until NIST releases that list. They are looking to do that somewhere end of July, if not September, for all 50 states to adopt. They do not want AI to be as loosey-goosey as it was with Section 230. They want all states to have some kind of harmonized guidelines for all those 30 items. So I'm wondering if our legislators may consider at some point later this year to maybe pass some laws now or pass some regulation or guardrails now, but look towards adopting the NIST Bible on what we should be implementing or regulating. The difficulty, as Senator Blumenthal said back in the middle of last year, number one is execution, number two is enforcement. And if we don't have money for many things, how are we going to enforce? So hence my suggestion of creating an office of liaison, because at this juncture, even the godfathers of AI will not call themselves a chief AI officer at this juncture. Everybody is now learning about the AI as it is developing. And so the role of a liaison is just to be an intermediary, interlocutor for the state and the various public and private sector. But certainly every state agency should have a CI, chief AI officer, so at least who can look over the horizon and say what applications that they need to implement. And going back to another, maybe it was Jinbo's comment, all the state agencies, even though may link up, we can't link up DRS because that is completely, it should be a walled garden. And same thing for the Department of Health, Connecticut, because PHI's, private health information, should not go into one of these, depending on what large language model. So we got to make sure all controls are not across the board. So anyway, my last comment was just if we can delay legislation till later part of the year, in the meanwhile, keep our working group on task to contribute and update and provide feedback to you. Thank you.
Thanks, George. And the way the legislative session works is we are only in from February through May this year. And so, and then the next legislative session would be the new legislature after the election, which would be seated next year, January through June next year. So one of the things I'll say is I think a lot of talk, and in looking at some of the recommendations, I think someone had recommended training of all public officials on AI, and again, there's the talk of training for students or what can we do. I think recognizing the limitations, I see value, but I think one of the things we may need to look at is, all parents for students need to sign off that they've read, it's not the policies and procedures, but they've received the manual from the school and they read through that. So I think one of the things we may want to consider with, just like for all of the employees of the state, we have to go through certain trainings, maybe creating video courses on responsible use of AI. And I think that, again, that things that we can do that the state can provide a resource, but we're not going to require extra work out of the schools or creating extra offices that we don't have. Nick had to go, unfortunately, And one of the things he had wanted to suggest was recognizing again that this is a dynamic, it's not a static topic, it's going to be changing, is that we fund research to case to make sure that we're staying ahead and we remain dynamic. And so again, that is something for us to look at as well. And one of the things I think is important is that we do utilize the assets we have, right? And I think CASE is a tremendous asset to our state, the Connecticut Academy of Scientists and Engineers, but also looking at the universities that we have. And I think, you know, one of the things is looking at the data privacy. What are the commonalities in those frameworks that we can use that are also, as we know, a lot of the AI is driven by the data, right? What can we look at from there, from the impact assessment requirement, which is a commonality of almost all the data privacy laws? Are there common things that we can utilize that won't hamper the innovation? But again, we're looking at that pause, right, between stimulus and response, that you're taking the time to be thoughtful, to make sure there are no harms before you put things in effect, and incentivizing businesses to do the right thing. Again, we don't want to slow down research, I think, especially, but all research, you know, from the universities, if you're they may have to go through IRBs. They may have to go through other processes in order to do the research. So, and if you're doing those things and you're making sure that you're safe, again, we're not going to add anything extra. But the key is on, you know, I think until people fully trust the AI, we're not going to see the full adoption. And we do need to do some things to help create some trust and familiarity. With that being said, I thank everyone for their comments today, for submitting. The goal, again, is to come up with the framework. So what we'll do is we'll review this meeting, look it over, try to pull out the things from all of the suggestions that were sent that are common, and then make some points for next week. And then we'll have some points that I think that have been brought up that we don't seem to have consensus. So we'll try to make a list of points that we had consensus on, and then we'll discuss some of the other points so that we can try to vote on a framework. The other thing that I'll be doing is I'm using an AI to transcribe all of the previous meetings, and then I'm going to summarize all of the speakers to generate a report. So we'll have that will be part of our final report. We'll incorporate the case information, all of the PowerPoints that were shared with us from all of our presenters to wrap into the final report. So next week, again, the goal will be to vote on a framework. And so I think in the final report, we'll prepare it as consensus items, and then maybe we'll list the other items that were probably what we'll do is, as we'll include in the back end of this final report everything that had been submitted to us. So
Senator,
again, full disclosure.
Can we also have the report from CASE that you mentioned?
Yes, that report will be included within our final report as well, the case report. And so the goal will be to distribute this to people on Friday so that you'll have the weekend to look it over, and then we will meet next week. And then the other thing is we will send an email out, because the way this task force was set up, there are voting members, and then there are members who do not have a vote. And so, including myself, I need to learn how to write legislation better. I didn't write myself in as a voting member of this task force. So while I'll be convening the meeting, I will not be able to vote. So we'll send out a notification to the voting members of the task force, and they will be the ones who will be able to vote on those final recommendations. So thank you to everyone. Yeah, for all of the work you've put in throughout the task force, but for your time in this meeting today and sharing your recommendations and your opinions. So thank you very much.